Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawkblogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser, excited to be with you on this Saturday where we get to connect with my good pal, Jeff Simmons, up there in Toronto. How's it going, Jeff? How's life?
Life is good. Life is good. We're at the peak of the summer right now. It's beautiful outside. Get a bit of. I was up really early this morning, so I'm probably more on your schedule, but it's good. I guess get it. It's always good to get an hour to take some time, hang out with you, and not change diapers. So it's exciting.
Yes. I definitely remember when we had our second kid, or Rachel was pregnant with our second kid. That moment where I had to set up the diaper pail again, and I was like, "Oh man,
Oh,
we're doing this again, aren't we?" So I feel your pain. Um, I see your Titleist hat. I was golfing yesterday with the great Mike Sando, and took him up to Snoqualmie Ridge, and man, I was really happy for him because he played well. Like, it's not easy to play that course well your first time,
hmm
and I played so bad. It was so aggravating. I think we ended up shooting the same score, but like, it literally was a week ago that I shot my best score of the year, and I was really like, all my scores are going down. And then ever since, it's just been going the wrong way. So I wish you all the best on your golf adventures. Hopefully I don't know if you're getting to golf much right now with a baby, but hopefully getting out there a bit.
I actually got to play yesterday,
Nice.
and my driver was really good. I got a new driver this year. I've been taking all year. I've been struggling. Yesterday, like everything hit. But the thing I'm usually good at, which is my iron game, was awful. So it's like you can never put two things together. And I played a course with my buddy. My buddy's pretty new at golf, and so we played like more of a beginner's course. And I don't know. There's one thing that bothers me in the world, and it's slow golf.
Yes.
It's like
Yes.
if when I'm playing with my dad, like sometimes like where do you have to go? I never have a good answer. I pace of play. I like playing just when you're not waiting every shot. And so I had to pull a couple questionable moves. You had to jump through a few groups, but once I got through, I calmed down. It was a lot of fun.
Good, man. I'm glad to hear it, because I basically took 20 years off golf after we had our first kid, because I was like, I could spend so many hours on football, so many hours on golf. I can't do both, and I had to kind of make a call. So it's I'm glad to hear you're getting a little golf in.
Well, yeah, I imagine weekends are pretty much done for me there. But during the day at work, I have some blocks where I can take like a client's golfing or find some time during the week. I work for an American company, so we had yesterday off. So yeah, yesterday's a day where I can be like, well, I I got to go golf today. But on weekends, if I'd be like, I'm leaving for 6 hours, see you later. I think that's done for a while.
Well, we've had a fun topic for today, and there's going to be people that see the thumbnail for this show and are going to be like, "Wait, what happened?" And it's not meant to be. It's meant to be eye catching, but nothing else. There's been a lot of talk, Jeff, about the Seahawks being one of the 10 worst teams in football. There's been a lot of rankings that have come out around it. I've seen a lot of the folks in our Discord channel and our Discord server, the patrons, like posting the next power rankings of the Seahawks in the bottom 10. And what I wanted to do, as I've been going through and doing kind of these roster rankings within the NFC West of different position groups, I actually found myself wondering if you could trade the Seahawks roster wholesale for another roster, which rosters would make that list? You don't get to make any edits. You get to take the whole thing, age and everything. And we're going to talk about it in the sense of for this season. So it's not you don't get to do the I'd like it for the next 3 years thing. You and I tend to be in that mindset, but for this season, let's really have that conversation. And so you and I will ping pong that back and forth, naming teams. I'm guessing at the beginning, it's going to be pretty easy and there's not going to be much discussion. But as we get further down the list, I'm really curious to see, like, are there rosters that you would trade for what the Seahawks have that are different than what I would trade, and how many make the list? And I think that's going to give us a little bit of a different perspective on where are the Seahawks relative to the rest of the NFL.
Yeah, because the thing that makes this exercise so interesting and almost tricky is the quarterback. And there's some teams, and we'll get into this, where their quarterback is definitely better than what Seattle has. But Seattle like 2 to 40 are way better. But the
Mhm.
quarterback has such a dominant impact on every. And I think Seattle, this uncertainty and why they're so weird in the power rankings is really no one knows what they have at quarterback, and that's where it's such an interesting exercise because that impacts almost every other player you have. But like if you put Geno on this team right now, I don't know how much better I would feel about the roster. But if you put Lamar Jackson, like it might be the number 2 pick or something. But
Yeah. Yeah. I found that myself. I do think that the quarterback position is I mean, I'm not saying anything crazy. It's absolutely paramount. And so I think a lot of the things that we'll probably get through quickly are just some of the quarterbacks that we think are really good. And then it gets a little stickier as you get further down. I got a couple in my mind already where just before the show, I was kind of looking through the rosters and I was like, I don't know. I don't know. And so I'm really curious to do that. So we're gonna get into that. That'll be fun. That'll take most of the show. Before we get into that, there was a patron question. We didn't do a real hawk talk the last few weeks. Been kind of taking it, playing it cool while everyone's enjoying their summer vacation. But there was a patron question I wanted to get to, and it really asked specifically about if you could pick one of these specific players to be an all-pro that hasn't been an all-pro for the Seahawks, who would it be? And instead of their specific list, I thought I'd just open that up for you and I to talk about for a second. If you could pick a Seahawks player to ascend to all-pro status, and let's leave Sam Darnold out of it because that's like too easy and like whatever. But like, who would be your first pick on the Seahawks roster to ascend to being an all-pro if you could pick one of them?
Gray Zabel.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
I've just been watching porous offensive lines for 10 years, and there's probably a few defensive players I definitely came to there. But for this team to become sustainably good, I think they can't just be like, we need to be average every year. At some point, they need to be good at offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Charles Cross, I can't remember who, I think it was Albert Breer said he's like one of the best left tackles no one talks about.
Mm-hmm.
And him becoming an all pro would help. But I think if they have another offensive lineman ascend into that all pro, and what I think just the offensive line, I think what Jim Harbaugh said really stood out with me. It's just that impacts every position. And if Gray Zabel can become like, say what, the all pro guard, and what that could do for this offense, and what that could do for the running game, and what that could do for everyone, I think the domino effect of that, what it can do for the quarterback, I think it's massive. So obviously some of the defensive guys certainly come to mind, making the strength of the team go from good to great. I think that's probably the best answer, and I imagine you'll go there. But for me, if they could have an all-pro offensive lineman, and we saw what that did in the Holmgren years with the left tackle and the left guard, but I think this team is just in such need of a good offensive line. And having an all-pro there would be just, for me, a massive impact on the team.
Yeah, it's a really fun question to play with because, and by the way, this question came from Neil G. So thank you, Neil G, for your question. My like the guys in the list is pretty long. Like one of the first guys that came, the Gray Zabel's on that list. I think Abe Lucas is on that list for similar reasons. I mean, if he became an all pro and you already know Charles Cross is good, you're in really good shape. Byron Murphy is my answer. I'm going to be pretty consistent about that. I think it's really critical for this team. I don't know that he's on the path to going there, but it would be huge if you had someone at the middle of your line do that. I think Derek Hall, Boye Mafe are probably on that list of consideration. And I think you also get into some of the other rookies, like if Eamon Worry or if Elijah Arroyo, like there's a number of these guys that if they were to ascend, that would be huge. But I think I end up with Byron Murphy. If I could pick one, I think that would, like it's close between him and Abe Lucas for me. So those are the two.
Yeah, I thought Hall and Murphy were the other ones that popped into my head there. I think if you can't go quarterback, it's best to be at the line of scrimmage. And again, what we've been saying for a couple of years now, me and you, and they've had better drafts, so they've had a lot of good players. But if they can get a great player at the line of scrimmage, and you more than anyone else I talked to has been like interior defensive line, and you can even transition from Leonard Williams to an all-pro D tackle and have them play together, that just becomes the whole core of your team and what scares other people. So yeah, I think Murphy is a fantastic answer, especially seeing what Jared Verse did year one. And I know he's going to get unfair comparisons, but it's hard not to see what that impact and wonder, like, what if we had a player like that?
All right, let's take one more patron question before we get into the meat of our discussion. And this one comes from Braxton. Braxton says, John Schneider walks up to you and says, give me one more offseason move you think needs to happen, and I will make it happen. What do you tell him?
For me, I'd want another defensive lineman, probably a nose tackle. And I'm a little nervous about the depth of their defensive line in general. I love the front line. I think they're one injury away from a pretty rough situation, especially with the kid from Notre Dame probably going to miss half the season at best. Some people might go center or right guard or receiver, and I think that's fair, but I don't think they're at the point where receiver is that important to me, where they are as a team. I think the defense is really the core of the team. I think I would love to have just like another nose tackle, so you're not using Byron Murphy there. You can really try to unleash him, and you're not using Jaron Reed there. And again, I think you've said they were the best EPA team in third down last year. The problem was they didn't get to third down very often. They weren't very good in first down. Mm-hmm. So I would love like an upgrade on Jonathan Hankins there with a pretty quality player. If you could do that, I would assume that would have to be a trade. But now that they signed Griffin and they don't have a lot of linebacker depth, but that still makes me a little nervous.
Yeah, it's hard for me to make a case for anything that tectonic, right? Like I would love some better linebacker depth.
Yeah.
Like I just did the linebacker room a couple days ago, and after Ernest Jones and Tyrese Knight, it gets dicey. And sure, the nose tackle would be nice. My mind kind of goes to contract extensions. Like personally, to me, I would sign Abe Lucas to a contract extension right now. Now, maybe his representation won't allow it because they're like, this is our lowest value. Abe's in great shape. We're going to play out the season and we're going to get a absolute killer deal. I'm like, sign him now, man. Sign him now because I think he's going to have a great season and I think he's going to be so much more expensive at the end of the year. So that would maybe be that would be my move. And you and I have talked about this. I tend to be a guy that wants to beat the market. I don't know that most GMs operate that way. I think they want to pay for proven performance, not for anticipated performance. And I don't know if that's the best way to go, but it's not the way I would.
Howie Roseman has done that exceptionally well. They usually sign guys to extensions early the goal of that is because they know the market's going to go up, and they've been getting guys that they're still paying big dollars to them. They're just a year early. And because of that, the market just laps all their guys. And a year later, they end up with these tons of value. And then you look at your roster and you're like, how do they have all these guys? The Seahawks did that perfectly with Tyler Lockett, exactly what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. When they signed him, he was kind of coming off a down year. They let Paul Richardson go at the time. And a lot of people threw their hands up like, what are they doing? And then a year later, Lockett just started his ascension after that rookie year. He kind of went down but that turned out to be a massive deal. And there's not a lot of examples where they've done that. There's some idea that they're cheap. I actually fight that a lot. I don't think that's true at all. They've paid more guys top of the market. They just don't value like the middle tier. And I think one of the criticisms that we've had of Schneider that I think is very fair is they have not signed a lot of anticipatory deals like that. And I think the Lockett one was their best example, but they should be trying to beat the market in other examples. That's how you buy low and get value. And they seem to wait till the last second, even with like Jamal Adams, and they got burned on that. Quandre Diggs, they paid probably more than they should have. And There's been a lot of deals where they end up, and I know Derek from our show goes crazy about the dead money. I think that's a bit overrated because it buys you other things. But I think they are constantly having to cut these contracts because they make mistakes with them.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I remember making this case to Softy for Walter Thurmond back in the day, and Softy thinking I'm crazy because Walter Thurmond had been injured all the time, and then Walter Thurmond became a Pro Bowl level slot corner, and his price went way up. And so I I don't know, man. And the way that I think the Seahawks, something they do well with is these incentive-based deals where it's tied to, if you have concerns about durability, then you put some, playing time incentives in there. You put some, roster bonuses in there, and you have some outs. But everyone thinks about it as like binary. Either they sign them or they don't. I'm like, you have the most leverage right now. Make them a really generous deal that if they perform is going to feel like a good deal to them. But if they don't, you're protected. And I mean, if Abe Lucas is not on this team next year, they don't have like Mike Jarrell, Josh Jones. Hopefully they, continue to progress, but I don't think either of those guys project to be your next right tackle. Mason Richmond, I don't know, but like, I feel like it's pretty important that they are thinking ahead that way. So good question there from Braxton. If you want to ask us questions, patreon.com/hawkblogger is the place to go. Get you ad-free audio of this show as well, access to the Discord channel, and you get verified over at hbtix.com, hbtix.com, the only place you can go to list your Seahawks tickets for sale so that you can make sure they are sold to Seahawks fans. All right, hbtix.com. I take no fee for using it. So just want to make sure we're facilitating Seahawks fans in the stadium for Seahawks games. All right, let's get into it, Jeff. I'm going to give you kind of the first pick in this draft of if you could trade the entire roster of the Seahawks for another entire roster with the goal of having the best chance to win a Super Bowl this year. Like that's what this is about. Not a 3-year for people that are just joining. It's not like future. It's about this year. Who would you take?
I'll start with Baltimore.
Hmm.
I think they have one of the best quarterbacks in the sport. I think they have a defense that by the end of the year was playing it that well. They had one of the better offensive lines. I think it's not just the quarterback. I think the whole roster. They've had trouble getting over the top, and that's been their issue. They've been a playoff team, but I think if you're evaluating who's still ascending and who could still get better, obviously the Super Bowl champs might have been the best bet, but I just love that roster. I think they draft well every year. I think they keep adding players. They had a good draft again. So they're a little ahead, especially with quarterback, where Seattle is.
Yeah, they're on my list. No real notes there. Quarterback, even the offensive line, defense. I think they're a pretty complete team. So they're on the list. My next pick, I'll go with the Kansas City Chiefs. Staying chalk. I actually don't love the Chiefs roster overall. I think there's real question marks at receiver, depending on what happens with Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy, and their offensive line. Obviously, they have some guys I really like: Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith. Josh Simmons is, by the way, getting some really positive early buzz. Their tight end group, Noah Gray is I think stepping forward, but Travis Kelce is still there, and I think is not anywhere close to what he used to be. I don't love their running back room, but not that matters. I think Chris Jones is amazing, but is aging. I think overall, I would definitely take the Seahawks defense over the Chiefs defense. And really, like overall, I'd take the Seahawks roster other than the offensive line and the quarterback. But when you got Patrick Mahomes, like he's just worth that much. So that's my next. Who are you taking?
Well, at this point, I've tried to tee up the Eagles because I don't really like them, but it's the Eagles. The Eagles probably have the number one roster. They're incredible up front on both sides. They brought back a lot of key players, and they've had pretty good drafts. And so even receiver Saquon Barkley, like they're set up assuming that Jalen Hurts doesn't take a huge step back, or they have that Super Bowl winning thing where they just don't care as much. But their roster, top to bottom, is the best in the league, and so I think any team is pretty much chasing those guys. So I'll go with the Eagles.
All right. I'll continue with the easy ones. I will take the Buffalo Bills. Again, this is primarily about the quarterback. But this is a team that has been on the precipice a number of times, but keeps getting turned back by the Chiefs. And I love how physical their offensive line is. I actually like the running back room and how physical they are there. Defensively, I'm really curious, Jeff. Like Joey Bosa's already dealing with some injuries. Like if it works out, even if it's just toward the end of the season, that could be the difference. Like they haven't had that edge rusher who's like a Joey Bosa level. I also like that they added Michael Hoyt, an underrated Rams defender. I think he's a good add for them this year. TJ Sanders is a dark horse defensive tackle rookie that I think has a chance to be one of the better defensive tackles in this draft, and I think he's a good understudy to Ed Oliver. And then, I mean, I really like, Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard. Like they've got Christian Benford's an underrated corner. So, and I also Max Hairston at corner, I think was a sneaky good draft pick there as well. So, I'm also a closet Bills fan. I always cheer for the Bills. And so, yeah, I think I'd take them. I mean, like Josh Allen, how could you not enjoy watching that guy?
Yeah, everyone thought they'd take a pretty big step back. They lost some defensive players before last year. They traded Stephon Diggs, and they were a better team. And they're very well coached defensively. I have questions about how McDermott manages games as a head coach, but their defense is very well coached relative to what they have. You're right. They don't have that dominant defensive pressure. Like Von Miller was paid a lot of money from them, and he just looked cooked by then. And they got a bad deal on there. But when I mentioned this in the show, like if you put Josh Allen on the Seahawks, I think their 2-30 or whatever is way better in Seattle. But Josh Allen's an obvious top 5 pick because of what he does for that team. And I think the rest of the roster, I don't know if it's even close between Seattle and Buffalo. But Buffalo's offensive line is sneaky underrated. Like they don't have a lot of stars, but they're a really good group and they play really well together. And they were a way more well-rounded team last year. They could use a couple other guys, but yeah, I think that's an obvious one. Yeah. So I'll go on a similar team that I sort of root for on the side, but they're actually not QB dominated, and they've had some not a great offseason, but the Detroit Lions.
Yeah.
I still think the Detroit Lions they've had probably the best drafts of any team in the league the last 5 years, and what they've done to build up that offensive line. And they did lose Frank Ragnow and Kevin Zeitler.
Huge.
That's huge. That is huge. They don't have anyone. Tate Ratledge might be playing center for them, but they still have the amount of skill they have with Gibbs and St. Brown and Aiden Hutchinson. They lost so many guys on defense last year. And to the point where like people almost forgot it. They lost both coordinators. They got a lot of things to overcome this year, but they still have a lot of talent. They accumulated between Sewell and Hutchinson and St. Brown. They just have so many all-pro kind of guys. And even though I don't know how they'll be without Ben Johnson, and everyone wonders what happens when you lose the OC, we're going to learn that now. But I still think I would definitely take that roster over Seattle's.
I don't think it's close, man. I really don't. I
look.
Goff, yeah. You've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's among the best receivers in the league. You've got, the best offensive lineman in football, probably in Penei Sewell, depending, Jordan Mailata is up there. You can debate that. Taylor Decker's obviously great at tackle as well. It's huge losing Ragnow, but, Christian Mahogany, the guy that we kept saying last year, like, why won't they take another, like they took Christian Haynes, let's take another guard. Let's take Christian Mahogany. We kept saying it. He goes in like the 6th round to the Lions and he played late in the year. And he's the reason they moved on from Zeitler. He was amazing last year, Jeff. Like he looked like he was better than Dominic Pooney when he was in there. So like he was really good. And they've got another young guy, Tate Ratledge, we obviously like. Miles Frazier, they drafted, who I love as a rookie from LSU. So I think they're just continuing to do really well there. And then Sam Laporta, one of the best tight ends in football. They got maybe the best running back room, or at least it's close to it. And I think the defense, they made some sneaky additions, man. Like DJ Reed, I think is an awesome upgrade at corner for them. He can play man without being as grabby as the corner that they had last year that went to the Patriots. I think Roy Lopez is a guy that you and I liked, and they signed him. I think that was a really sneaky good addition. And Tyleik Williams, the run stuffer rookie, like I think they, not to mention Brian Branch and Terrion Arnold and Aiden Hutchinson and all that. So I think it's not close. They're easy for me. All right. My turn. I'm going to take us in some less obvious directions. I'm going to take the Houston Texans.
They're on my list.
I kind of stared at this one for a bit, man, because CJ Stroud, I'm a huge fan of his. I was a fan of him before the draft, certainly fan after. I think he's incredibly talented. And I hate their offensive line. It's so like it's way worse than the Seahawks offensive line. I would not trade their offensive line for the Seahawks. I love their receiver room is really interesting with the Iowa State duo, rookie the Jaden Higgins and Noel. By the way, Higgins is killing it so far from all reports. So interesting to watch that. And then you got Will Anderson Jr., who I know you're a huge fan of, Danielle Hunter, Aziz Al-Shaair, and then you got Derek Stingley Jr., who might be the best corner in football. So I would take the Seahawks defense overall, probably over the Texans. That's a tough one, but I think I would. I'd take the Seahawks offensive line over the Texans, but CJ Stroud and the overall group, I would take it over what the Seahawks have.
Yeah, I had them on my list. Same idea. They have such a well-built defense with young drafted players, and then they added Hunter. But like the corners they got, like got Lassiter last year in the draft, it just fit in like a glove. And Stingley's a guy me and you loved in the draft, and from what I believe we are aware of, I think the Seahawks, he was very high on their hit list. So no one thought he'd go that high. No one thought Cross would slip. So Will Anderson's a guy like I was begging for the Seahawks to take. They didn't have a chance to, but he's been an all-pro. And even you watch them play the Chiefs in the playoffs last year, Will Anderson's the best player on the field. And he took over. They should have won that game, but their offensive line is horrible. And they got worse. They lost Laramie Tunsil. They lost Shaq Mason. They're just, I don't even know what they're doing. But when you have CJ Stroud and a defense that talented, I think you have to put them ahead of where the Seattle is with the uncertainty.
Okay, where are you going next?
Okay, that was a good one. Here's the thing. This is what I mentioned. I mentioned this earlier. You can have a shit roster, but if you have a great quarterback, I'm gonna take you. And I'm gonna go with the Bengals.
Oh, okay. Okay. Tell me why.
I think Joe Burrow's incredible. I think Joe Burrow is that good. I think he's good enough to compete for a Super Bowl every year. And even last year, with their defense was so bad, it submarined an entire MVP season. They didn't make the playoffs. But just, I know how hard it is to find guys like him. And they were in the Super Bowl a couple years ago. They beat Kansas City a couple times with clearly inferior rosters. And they still have Jamar Chase, who's maybe, other than Sewell, one of the best players in the entire sport. But if I had the Bengals roster, I wouldn't operate like the Bengals and screw up all my player management. But I still think the combination of Burrow, Chase, what they have in some areas, and I think Seattle's a lot better than them, like 5-30. But that's how good I think Burrow is. And some people wouldn't agree with that. They'd rather have the full team. But I don't think the Bengals are like a total disaster. They have some work to do on defense, but I would take the Bengals. Just having that guy in his prime for the next 10 years, I would take that.
Okay, so I wouldn't.
Okay.
I wouldn't. Wow. I stared at this one for a while, and I will tell you this, Jeff. 99% of fans are going to agree with you. So I'm okay being on an island here. Joe Burrow, there's no question. Like, Joe Burrow is unbelievably talented. He is one of the top 5 quarterbacks in football. There's no question, right? Jamar Chase, really, really good. I'm not as big of a, like, we'll get to this a little bit later, but I would take the Minnesota pair of receivers over the Bengals pair. I'm maybe alone in that, but I really feel a little differently there. Their offensive line is so atrocious, man. Like, it's so bad.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me. And I don't love the running back room. I don't love their tight end room. And then I look at the defense, and other than Trey Hendrickson, there's not a single player I would take over a Seahawk player at that position. Like, wow. I look
at linebackers either.
No, like Demetrius Knight. I like Demetrius Knight. He's a rookie. No, Logan Wilson. Maybe Logan Wilson I would take over Tyrese Knight. So that's I was thinking about Logan
Well,
Wilson
the
versus
fact that I had
Ernest
to call it a
Jones.
pull is, I guess that's interesting. But
Yeah. Like,
that's how good I think Burrow is, though, relative to what you just said. Is totally right.
yeah. So that's where, like, I stared at this one for a while. It was a
Yeah,
question. But for me, they don't make the list.
fair enough.
All
A
right.
lot, yeah, your pick.
All right. I'm going to go Washington Commanders.
So that was my similar thought because I think they're both in a very similar spot.
Yeah, I am Jaden Daniels pilled, as I think most people are. I'm not easily, impressed by, rookie quarterback performances, but what he did last year, I thought he was at times the best player in the sport. So like he just absolutely lifted what was a not very good roster last year to an NFC championship. I think it almost completely on his shoulders. So I'm really curious what the ceiling is for this guy. He was super impressive, much better than I expected him to be. And then, you know, they did enough. Like the offensive line, Larry Tunsil's a fine addition there. Sam Cosmi, who's injured, but it can be okay. I love Scary Terry McLaurin. Um, the defense, I mean, it's got it's stretching it a bit.
It reminded me a lot
I mean,
of the Bengals. Yeah.
Frankie Louvu, has something to offer. Obviously, Bobby is Bobby. Deron Payne is fine. I like Mikey Sainer still, so it's definitely a work in progress. There's no doubt. But I can't look at Jaden Daniels and not just be like, all right, there's enough there that I would take them.
Yeah, I have them in the same tier, and I was curious once you kind of shot down my Bengals one. I was curious if you're gonna go there, but I saw a couple like top 10 quarterback lists that have come out in the last month, and I try not to react to lists, but I get fooled every so often. But both Yahoo Sports, I think it was Charles McDonald, and they didn't have Jaden Daniels as a top 10 quarterback, and one had Geno Smith and one had Jordan Love and
Hmm.
Dak. I'm like, what planet are you guys on? Like, I know he's a rookie, but like, he would be fifth in the league for me, or even. And I'm with you. I think he's that good.
All right, your turn.
Okay, I'm curious where you're on this one. This is a team I think is like just a slightly more ahead of in development in Seattle. They're one of the best managed teams that nobody talks about. The roster is really good at the spots I think is important to be really good, but they're just a totally small market. I'm gonna go Tampa Bay Bucs.
Ah,
I think they're just a little ahead of where Seattle is, especially I think their offensive line is where the biggest difference is. They have an incredible receiver room as well. And Seattle's biggest questions are probably at those two spots. And I think Baker has been really good in their system. So I I think it's one of the sneaky best drafted, managed in terms of like signing players. Their roster is really complete. They just don't have a lot of like great guys on defense outside of Vita Vea. But like their offense is really good. And if the team that gave Washington the most trouble in the playoffs last year, it took 2 fumbles from Tampa to lose the game. They should have beat Washington in the playoffs last year, and they were with Detroit a couple of years ago. I think Tampa's roster is excellent, so I'm going to take them.
man, this was a tough one. I stared at this one as well, and I was like, if this was looking over 3 years, then I would take the Seahawks. There's a lot of old guys on this roster, and I mean,
Yep.
Mike Evans, I don't know how much longer he's going to be able to do it. Chris Godwin's coming off of a serious injury. Uh, I do like their offensive line. I'm like, I think Baker Mayfield's fine. I think he's overrated. I think people freak out about Baker Mayfield. If like you gave me the choice of Geno Smith or Baker Mayfield, it wouldn't be like if I had to trade something to get Baker Mayfield, I wouldn't. I don't know. I'm like not huge. I don't believe he's going to be a guy that takes you to the top. Vita Vea is a little older. I do like Kalijah Kancey. Levante David's obviously pretty old. So I kind of go back and forth on that team, but I think I have to ultimately agree with you for this
It's
season.
like painful to you, yeah.
For this season, I think I would take him, but like my instinct is I feel like Tampa Bay's overrated personally. Like we're going to find out when they play this year against the Seahawks, but I don't know that I think they're a mid team, personally.
Yeah, I love their offensive line. They drafted two of your favorite guys in the last couple of years, Graham Barden and Cody Mauch. And they have Tristan Wirfs, who outside of Sewell might be
Exactly.
he's the guy. And then they have Vea and Cansey and Antoine Winfield, and the receiver room now with Buka is incredible because McMillan really came alive. And then Bucky Irving was a huge difference maker. They didn't have a run game. Rashad White is a crappy player who benefits from that system, and he's like least efficient. Bucky Irving was awesome, and he made a huge difference. And so Baker Mayfield threw 40 touchdowns last year. And so a lot of it is system, and they've had two different OCs there, and they're on their third OC now. So who knows what will happen? Liam Cohen went to Jacksonville, but I like their team. I'm definitely higher on you than they are.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to take the first NFC West team.
Okay, I knew this was coming.
I am going to take the Los Angeles Rams. I don't love doing it, and it's interesting, Jeff. I've been doing these rankings that I'm doing pretty much every day. I want to pull it up real quick because I want to see what the actual numbers are, but I have not had them come in first very much in position groups, but they come in high in the ones that I think really matter. And like they have actually only come in first in the wide receiver room. I gave them the number one wide receiver room in the West, which is not saying much. The West wide receiver rooms are not great, honestly, but they have that edge room. Like the pass rush that they have is something that should be the envy of like a young pass rush across the line is something that every team should be envious of. And then I think their offensive line, if it's healthy, can be quite good. And you've got Matt Stafford at quarterback, who I've got all sorts of questions about. But if you're just saying for this year, I totally get why you'd say they were the favorites for this season. So I mean, Jared Verse carries a lot of water for me here, to be very honest. And Puka Nacua, and they're a very promising young team that's also good right now.
Yeah, it pains me to say this, but I can't disagree with you on this one because of the defensive line, the quarterback, and they're kind of a flawed team in a lot of areas, but those strengths covered up. And like I was watching, Mina Kimes did an interesting podcast with Ryan Clark where they kind of do essentially what we're doing, but they put up two teams and the guest will pick. And they had the Rams at 9 and the Seahawks at, I think, 20. And I've seen a couple other people. I think Kevin Clark did a similar show with one of the former Rams writers. The Rams, in my opinion, should be ahead of Seattle. I put that on Twitter, and I think that's fair. But the gap to me makes no sense. Seattle had a better point differential last year with a excuse of an offense, whatever that was. And they had a way more impactful draft class. Yes, the Rams added Devontae Adams. Yes, they have more stability, but I think the gap between them should be pretty small. And I think you give the Rams the edge. Stability at quarterback and receiver is a big deal. But I don't understand. It's so much recency bias from the Eagles game, in my opinion. Like, if you put on the tape of the Rams playing the 49ers and the Cardinals, even the Seattle game that Seattle should have beat them, I do get it. I don't agree with this idea that there's a massive gap between them.
There isn't. And I think one of the things that you lose out on stack ranked rankings 1 through 32 is the difference between tiers of teams. And I mean, if you look statistically at these teams, there's groupings. There are literal tiers. And the difference between Baltimore, KC, Philadelphia, Buffalo, maybe Detroit, and some of the rest of these teams that we've even talked about, they were already into like tier 2 or 3 of teams. And who knows like how big of a gap there is between the 10th ranked team and the 20th ranked team in terms of real quality versus just actual ranking. But so the Rams are on the list. That means you are up. We are already, so you have agreed with all the ones I've listed, which gets you to 10 teams so far. I did not agree on Cincinnati, so I'm at 9.
Did you agree on Tampa?
I did ultimately agree on Tampa. It's a hard one, but yes, I did.
Okay, I don't think you're going to agree on this one. I think,
sweet.
I think the gap is close. I'm going to stay in the same city. I'm going to go with the Los Angeles Chargers.
Okay.
And big thing is just offensive tackle group is Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt, which I think is top 2 in the league. I think Seattle
Mm.
has the talent to push that at some point, but they've not shown the stability. And Joe Alt was a top 5 pick. Clean that tackle group's outstanding. Justin Herbert at quarterback. He's been a flawed. I think he's so overrated by the media, but still, I think he's a lot further along. I think Seattle would kill that. Put Herbert in this team. I think this team is a Super Bowl contender. I like a lot of the players they have elsewhere. They do have some guys like Khalil Mack's getting older, but they still have Derwin James and some All-Pro level guys. Zaya Henley played like an All-Pro last year. Lad McConkey I really like, but him and JSN kind of washed it. I think JSN's even better than he is. But I just think they're more set up to be a complete team than Seattle is. Like their ability to run the ball, even with J.K. Dobbins, I think they got the first round pick there at running back now. He's exciting. I just think what that offensive line and the stableness with the quarterback, and they did play well on defense, but they're not. Seattle has better personnel defensively.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's like I have them probably in the same tier, and there's one other team. I'm curious where you are on that other team. I think it's close, but I think because of the quarterback and the tackles, I would take the Chargers.
Yeah, I've stared at this one too.
It's not easy.
Even as you're saying it, and I'm like, I kind of landed on no. And as I'm looking at this list, and the receiver group, I think is a big question mark. Mike Williams, Quentin Johnston. Maybe it's not even a question mark; it just hasn't been good. Lad McConkey's obviously great, but I like the Trey Harris draft pick for them. I think that could work out for them. There's already buzz around Oronde Gadsden, the tight end from Syracuse that has been playing, the rookie that they drafted. You add Mekhi Becton to Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater and Zion Johnson. Like it is certainly a formidable and young, talented offensive line. Omarion Hampton at running back gives them a weapon there that they haven't had before. I am way lower on Justin Herbert than the rest of the NFL. I think it's kind of amazing to me, Jeff, that he has built up such a amount of support that when he threw 4 interceptions in his playoff game, it was like had zero effect on people's perception on Justin Herbert. Sam Darnold has a game where he gets sacked 9 times, gets intercepted once or something like that, and he is now the worst quarterback that ever played. Like, it's a little shocking to me, and I think a little bit, I don't know, like,
there's a certain corner of the internet, and I call them like the film hipsters, and they do great work, but they love Herbert, and I think that
yeah.
almost like Steven Ruiz from the Ringer, for example, he was like the Geno biggest proponent, and this group loves Geno Smith as well. So that group has been killing Seahawks this offseason. They love Herbert. And I think like the online crowd sees all this, and I'm with you. I don't think he justifies, but I still think he's way further along than what we have. But
yeah,
if I had him in the same regard as Burrow, for example, who I had as a no-brainer pick that you didn't agree with, I struggled with this one. So I'm closer to you on this than I am, say, a Ruiz. But I still think that offensive line and the quarterback, with having a good defense, not a great defense, is enough to push me over the edge.
Yeah, and I like the Jamari Caldwell pick that they took. I mean, God dang, well, he went pretty early. He went pretty early.
In our Sims, we were getting 4th, 5th round. He went the
I
end of
know.
the 3rd. So
yeah, so I think ultimately I will side with you on this one. It's tough. Yeah, I 100% take the Seahawks. I think the Seahawks defense clears their defense personnel wise by a decent amount, and yeah, other than that, like I like the Seahawks receiver room a lot more, and I don't like the Seahawks receiver room that much. And I like the Seahawks tight end room a lot more. And I'm not that high on Justin Herbert, but I think if I look at this in its totality and the question marks we've got around Sam Darnold, I think I'd have to be, for this year, I'd have to be honest. Yeah, I'd probably take that roster.
the hardest thing about this is like, are we eliminating the coaches? Because so much of these coaches.
We are.
Yeah.
We are eliminating the coaches. We're going to do this probably another time where we do this. We'll do a coaches survival.
Because like you take
draft.
Harbaugh off that roster and you put them with someone else, I don't know how good they would be.
Right.
That with Harbaugh just works because they built that team so many times. But that's where let's put it as a package. We'll go with the Chargers here.
Okay. All right. So that puts me up next, correct? It's getting a little dicey, dude. We're getting a little
There's one
dicey.
tier I have here where I think Seattle's in, so I'm curious where you are.
So I'm gonna do another painful one for Seahawks fans. I might be taking all the painful ones. I am gonna put the Denver Broncos on the list.
They were on my list.
I think the Denver Broncos are a sneaky Super Bowl contender. And that's with me having a lot of questions about Bo Nix. Their defense, man. I'll be running all these numbers for various things. I'm looking at Seattle, and Denver just pops up all over the place. They were so good last year on defense. And then they add Dre Greenlaw, and if he's healthy, guy's like a serious difference maker. And Talanoa Hufanga, who's an all-pro, if he's healthy. And it is a question for both those guys. And then you draft Jahdae Barron. Like, he's incredibly talented and gives them like Pat Surtain, Jahdae Barron at nickel. And then Savion Jones is an interesting rookie that they added as a rotational pass rusher behind Zach Allen and DJ Jones. John Cooper was a great linebacker last year. Alex Single, Nick Benito, there's a lot going on for that defense. And then offensively, that offensive line, Garrett Bowles and Quinn Miners and that whole group, I think is pretty darn good. And Bo Nix is good enough. I'm not a huge Bo Nix guy, but I think he's good enough. So I wish the receiver room was a little bit better. They seem to be high on Pat Bryant, the guy they drafted, I think out of Illinois. I'm not as high on him, but yeah, ultimately for this year, I think I would take that team over that roster over the Seahawks.
So I think them and the Seahawks are very similar.
Yeah.
And I actually want to pour Mina Kimes, I clearly value her opinion. She was doing another show, I can't remember, with another ESPN guy, and they were going through projecting their top defenses. They were trying to rank their top 10 defenses. And she had them number 1. And all the advanced stats, love this team.
Mm-hmm.
What was the issue with Seattle last year? When they played good teams, what happened? When Denver played good teams last year, they got run out of the building. They played the Bengals at the end of the year. They gave up over 30 points. They gave up over 30 points to the Bills in the playoffs. They gave up, I think, 28 points to the Chargers. I think the Broncos benefited a lot from weak scheduling. And I think it's close. I think them and Seattle had a very similar story on defense. They were just a little more complete. They didn't have that 9-game stretch that Seattle couldn't stop the running. But Mina had them as the number 1 defense. And I thought Denver had the best free agency of any team in the whole league this year. Getting Hufanga and getting Greenlaw to what I think too many people are always filling holes instead of building strength. So I think it's close because I love their offensive line. I'm going to say no. I think their defense is overrated. I'm going to say Seattle is better than them.
Okay. Our first disagreement on your end. All right, cool. Love it. Who's your next?
Okay. This is the last little tier, and I'm really struggling with this one. The Green Bay Packers.
Okay.
I just don't like that team, but I think they're just a little ahead with a more proven quarterback. I'm nervous about their receiver room. I think they're in a similar spot to Seattle, but again, I like how their defense was coached for the most part last year. I think they're, in terms of Seattle, just a little more complete. They're a very similar setup in terms of they're really good everywhere, but they're not great anywhere. And so Seattle's been in the same spot. I think they have a chance to be great. I just think they're a little more proven up front, a little more proven offensively. And I just think Jordan Love, both those Yahoo guys had him as a top 10 quarterback. I don't think I would. But I think he's ahead of Darnold. And, Darnold went in and beat him last year, I think twice. But it's not just one-on-one. Minnesota's got a pretty good team. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's your next pick. But I'm going to go with Green Bay with a slight edge.
Yeah.
I don't feel good saying it.
I know. This is tough because on one hand, it should be an easy one, right? Jordan Love, good young quarterback, has had some pretty impressive moments in the last few years, especially in the playoffs 2 years ago. And then I think the receiver room is pretty interesting. Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, you add Matthew Golden to that. Savion Williams, the slash kind of player that they drafted. And then their offensive line is good. It's pretty good, and it handled the Seahawks last year. Josh Jacobs came in and was still the man last year. But then defensively, like I like Edge Cooper, I like Xavier McKinney, I like Javon Bullard, but I think I think the defense is not great. And the question for me on this one, Jeff, is if the Seahawks have truly like a top 5, top 3 defense, like if that's what they are this year, and I think that's realistic, would I really take this offense? Is it that much better than the Seahawks offense where I think it's going to make up that ground? Because this Packers defense is not a top 5 defense. And I don't think that offense is a top 5 offense. I think
it's only when they play Ryan Grubb there.
So I think going back and forth on this, I don't think I'm going to take this over the Seahawks. It is a gamble, and it's probably crazy.
It's not crazy.
Because I just feel like the Seahawks defense has a chance to be the best unit by far out of these, better than their offense or better than their defense. And I think the offense has a chance to be better than the Packers defense, if that makes sense. Like I think the Seahawks defense is better than the Packers offense, which is their strongest unit. And I think the Seahawks offense is going to be better than the Packers defense. That's where I'm landing.
No, I don't think it's crazy at all. When the Seahawks played the Packers, especially in the first half, they kind of embarrassed themselves. And so a lot of us were like, oh my God, we're not even close to them. But you don't want to always look at it. That can just be a matchup thing sometimes. Because when the Packers played the Eagles last year and they played the Vikings in some of those games, they got blown out of the doors and they had to like scramble to come back. It was a lot like some of those Seahawks games. So I think the gap between those teams is very small. And I did pick them and I even struggled with it. I think they're in the same tier. So I think it's close. And so I have no problem with anyone saying no on that one. I think it's a 50-50.
All right. My goodness, where am I going to go next? I mean, it's getting hard. So I'm ultimately
Don't do it.
I'm gonna take the Minnesota Vikings.
Okay.
I know you're gonna go a different direction. I was thinking about that team too.
No, I thought you were going somewhere and I was gonna stop you.
I can't do what you're thinking I'm gonna do.
No, I refuse to do that either.
I might do it, but so I look at the Vikings, and when the Seahawks back in 2010, 11 were building up the roster, I said that they had created a quarterback-shaped hole. Like everything else was just what you want it to be, and they just needed to fill in that quarterback. And I feel like the Vikings, they run their team the way I would want my team run. The players they pick, the priorities they set. Justin Jefferson, to me, one of my favorite players in the sport. I think the best receiver. It's not even close in my opinion. I think that when people say Jamar Chase versus Justin Jefferson, I think that's a joke. I think Justin Jefferson is on a tier by himself. I think Jordan Addison's really good. I think Jalen Naylor's not that bad either, by the way. And then the offensive line, Christian Darrisaw, when healthy, is a great left tackle. I love Donovan Jackson, the rookie they pick. Then they signed Will Fries. Brian O'Neill is one of the best right tackles in football. So I think their offensive line is really solidified this offseason. I don't love the running back room, although Jordan Mason was a good addition. I think Jonathan Allen's a nice addition to an already good defense. Javon Hargrave, in this style of defense, I like Javon Hargrave. We are not asking him to be this stout run defender. And they just got playmakers up and down the defense. So the fact is, JJ McCarthy, I'm not high on him. In fact, I don't think he's going to be very good. But ultimately, like if I had to make the bet on this roster and JJ McCarthy being the only question mark versus the Seahawks roster where there's a number of question marks, I think I would probably take the Vikings.
They were the last team on my list. And so I had them, Denver, Green Bay, Seattle. They're all a similar tier, in my opinion. I have some concerns about the Vikings with the way they're they haven't drafted a lot of players. And Ryan Grigson did the same thing in Indianapolis where they were a little too reliant on free agency and they got old really quick. And they had a very similar, I think it was Mike Sando's article where people were wondering, like, is Ryan Grigson running their team again? Because they made a lot of like short Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave. And But I think when you consider how bad everyone's was like, well, Minnesota had the perfect infrastructure last year, and I think you were the first to say like their offensive line was actually really bad, and they've done a really good job putting that back together. But it's an old, could potentially, when you sign a lot of free agents, you're buying players with problems. And Ryan Kelly has had injuries. Will Fries is coming off major injury. Javon Hargraves had injuries. Jonathan Allen's had injuries. They're relying on a lot of older, beaten up players. Seattle has a lot of ascending players. So I wonder about this team and if the injuries and too many free agents. It actually happened with Luck and the Colts, the same strategy, and didn't work because they had too many beaten up players. But I think Minnesota has enough kind of blue chippers with Jefferson, what they've done with Brian Flores and keeping him and all those defensive players they've signed. I think they're just a little more established, but this was the last one for me where I probably would take Minnesota, but I wasn't comfortable about it. Like we saw how close that game last year was, and I give them the minor like edge, but I have concerns about them.
Yeah, yeah. We're definitely at that point in the list. I had one more team that I really strongly considered. Ultimately, I'm going to leave them off the list.
Who was it? I'm tapped out.
I'm gonna share the name because they're like right on the border for me, and you're gonna think I'm crazy. So are a lot of people. The Atlanta Falcons. Yeah. I'm such a huge believer in Michael Penix Jr. and I think that offense, their offense could be the story of the NFL this year. I think he's going to be such a huge. I think he's going to put up huge numbers. I think they're going to be a Ferrari on offense, and so for this year, with I don't love their receiving room outside of Drake London, and so that's unfortunate. Obviously, Kyle Pitts has been a massive disappointment. I think their offensive line is good enough. I don't think it's great, but I think their tackles are good. And I think they have two good guards, like very good guards in Bergeron and Lindstrom. I think they lost, obviously, their center, which we'll see how that turns out for them. Bijan Robinson is one of my favorite players to watch in football right now. And so, like, defensively, it's a if
you didn't like the Bengals, yeah.
I know. I just like Michael Penix a lot. And I also I think he's going to bring. I think that offensive line is such a difference between them and the Bengals. So I think that's where I had them ahead of the Bengals for me, but I'm not going to put them on the list for right now. I'm going to leave them off. They were definitely a consideration.
I hope you are right because the Rams have their first round pick, so I hope they're amazing. I think they're sneaky the worst run team in the whole league. I think there's a case there. If you look at what they've done in the draft, even with the Kirk Cousins since Terry Fontenot took over, like for one, let's just go with one. Kyle Pitts was taken 4th overall, who's now like a dime a dozen player. The next 2 picks were Penei Sewell and Jamar Chase, who are not just 2 of the best players in their positions. Then they took Drake London over like Kyle Hamilton. And then this year they're like, oh, we haven't drafted any defensive players, so let's trade a future first round pick to make sure we have a competent one. And like the Michael Penix thing got crushed, but it looks great in terms of that. But no one understood why they ever signed Kirk Cousins, and now they got this $40 million anchor that could have been used to spend on defense. So I just hate how they've built their team. I think they've almost been inept that Penix might even cover. And I love if there was like I know the NBA writers talk about like the league pass rankings and like the most fun teams to watch. The Falcons this year might be the most fun because they're so bad on defense and they're so fun on offense. Every game could be really fun.
Yep.
But in terms of like good teams, I don't have them very high.
Yeah, I think their defense. So I agree with everything you said, other than the fact is, I think that they might be the blind squirrel that finds the nut because they threw all these weird. They did the way that they've done it is wrong and not good process. So I totally get that. But James Pierce has the physical ability to be the best edge rusher and outside of the guy taken in the top 5. But he's really talented. He just has some real character questions. And I love that kind of speed on their turf, indoor field. Jalen Walker is a guy that I wasn't as high on, but a
You
lot of
didn't like
people
him. Yeah.
were very high on him. Like they could end up with two good edge rushers. Brandon Dorlus was a guy last year that we liked at the defensive line. He did not have a great rookie season, but if he like Rukororo was a like a big athlete, but a project. I'm not saying that I believe that all these guys are going to work out, but there's a path where they do a lot of things really stupidly. They end up with a top tier quarterback. They end up with, a top tier receiver. They end up with top tier pass rush. Like it could happen. I don't think it's even the craziest thing that could happen. So I see them being that Ferrari on offense and with potentially some really speedy rushers on defense and being a dangerous team. Especially in that division. I think they're going to put up a lot of good numbers, and I think they're going to give Tampa Bay everything that they can handle. So with that, Jeff, you said you were tapped out. I'm tapped out. That makes your list. You had 13 teams that you'd take their roster over the Seahawks, at least by my math. I had 12 teams. So that puts the Seahawks between 12 and 13, depending on like roster rankings for you and I. Let's talk about for a second. Give me a couple teams. Let's keep going on teams that were in consideration for you.
San Francisco.
Yeah, right.
Like
right.
I bet you most people, if you ask them, would take San Francisco. I thought like their upper echelon players are still amazing. Trent Williams and Nick Bosa. Seattle doesn't have anyone in that tier. But when I heard Grant on with you, and I know Grant's obviously super cynical, but he was talking about like the amount of injured players they have in their rookie class and how much they're relying on these injured players. And then when you consider their offensive line, and then I heard you do the receiver show, and that made me a little nervous. I just think for this year, they're relying on so many rookies on defensive line. Even Byron Murphy, who's like a pretty established player relative to like an Alfred Collins or CJ West. We saw what that was like as a rookie. It's not easy to make a huge impact. Like he barely flashed and he had pretty good like behind the scenes numbers. I think for them to work on defense, they need so many rookies and so many injured guys. And the receiver thing with Ayuk, I don't know if he's coming back. It seems like everyone just forgot whenever their free agency was going on. Everyone's like, this is a freaking disaster. I think their draft is good for 2-3 years out, but I think it's going to take some time. So I love still the upper echelon guys, Kittle, Trent Williams, Bosa. But outside of that, they've lost just a lot. Like with Debo and Ayuk were going too, and who knows what McCaffrey will be, but I don't know, 38-year-old Trent Williams, I'm not there. I'd give Seattle an edge. I think they're ascending more.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard when you list the names to not be like, you're crazy for not taking that team over the Seahawks team. But when you look at the injury questions, Brandon Ayuk, injury question. You look at Trent Williams, injury question. Christian McCaffrey, injury question. Yeah, you kind of keep even
Kittle
is an injury question. And if I had to take the Seahawks roster with all the question marks there that are about performance, for the most part, there were only like injury questions I would say are Uchenna Nwosu and Kenneth Walker. Like those are your primary injury questions. Maybe Abe Lucas. Throw Abe Lucas on that list, right? But I take the Seahawks question marks. I think there's fewer questions. I think they're maybe bigger. Like Sam Darnold is a big question. The receiver room is a big question. The offensive line is a big question. Although in my mind, I've kind of like already gotten to where I think it's going to be better, which is a terrible thing for me to do to myself. But I look at the 49ers and I think the questions I have about that, I'm more sure are going to end up in the wrong place. I'm just not interested in being that team.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off there for a second, but
no, go ahead.
The one thing I'd buy if I'm the Niners is what Shanahan could do for an offense. And if you're saying we're taking coaches out of the equation, I think if you drop that offensive personnel with Purdy and questionable receivers and a left tackle who's 38 and questions everywhere but right guard, I don't know how great I'd feel about that personnel group. Where when you had the receivers going and the tight end going and the running back going, they seemed unstoppable. But now, if the left tackle and the running back are question marks, we saw what happened with Purdy when you kind of leveled the playing field last year.
Yep.
You take Shanahan out, I don't know.
Exactly. Because this is just roster. And yeah, I just don't know, man. I don't know. So that like I think it's totally fine for people like that's a homer take and you take the 49ers. I didn't quite get there with them. The other team that I would throw out there that I think I at least considered was the Chicago Bears.
Wow, I wouldn't have guessed that from you.
I was just like considering it because I think they took an interesting path to this offseason, man. They kind of did things that you and I have said, like just address the offensive line. And they go and they spend the money on Drew Dahlman. I don't think Drew Dahlman's an all pro, but he's a very good, like solidly above average center. They trade for Joe Tooney with like, doesn't have to give much. They get Jonah Jackson, who I like, has been a pro bowler, and I think will fit well in that system. So I really like what they did. And then they draft Ozzie Trapillo, who's a good depth tackle. I just think they were smart about that. Then they draft Colston Loveland. I think the tight end has a chance to Cole Kmet's already pretty good. Durham Smythe isn't even that bad. They signed him. And then you got Roma Dunze and DJ Moore. Like there's a lot of interesting things going on there. I don't like the running back room at all. And then on defense, man, you've got a lot. Like that defense was hidden by how bad that offense was. Montez Sweat's very good. Jervin Dexter's good. They get Grady Jarrett added. Tremaine Edmonds is a great linebacker when he's on the field. And then Jalen Johnson, like there, and Kyler Gordon is also a good player at nickel. So I think there's a lot of talent on that team. I just happen to be really low on Caleb Williams. And so ultimately, I just don't get there with them. And I think the Seahawks defensive talent overall is better. So that's kind of where I ended up. But I think that's why I at least thought about it.
You know, it's the offensive personnel is pretty good. It's very young. But if we're saying to win the Super Bowl this year, if we're telling 2 years out, that would be a really interesting case. But I think this is going to be a pretty big year of development for them. I think Seattle, just what they have on defense, is a lot further along than anything the Bears have. But I think for like even just projecting best rosters moving forward, especially with Ben Johnson's impact on some of these guys, they're in a really good shape offensively. I just don't think I don't think they're very close this year.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of hope that they're good this year in a way because the 49ers get them on the schedule instead of the Vikings. So let's hope that they're good enough to give them trouble. A couple more things I just want to touch on here. Were there other teams? There's a few teams that I think other people would say should be on this list that were not. Are there any teams that fall into that category for you where you're like, man, there's people that have this team above? I would not take their roster.
So I saw like the Bina Ryan Clark thing. They had the Steelers on there.
That's one of them for me.
And to me,
no way.
That to me is one of the more delusional operating franchises right now. They remind me a lot of like, remember the Eagles' dream team?
Yeah.
2011. That I have and who knows? Seattle plays them in week 2. We'll see them pretty quick. But the way they're building the team just seems like it's like a 14-year-old playing Madden. It doesn't seem like a sustainable. And the guys they added, like it seems like they've learned absolutely nothing from how the Jets era went with Rodgers. So I saw them. Some rankings will have them like 5 spots over Seattle. Ugh, that team makes me queasy.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, and I mean, I'm way lower on Aaron Rodgers than I think the majority of national folks. I just don't think he's very good anymore. I think he's actually a net negative to an offense. He basically throws 2 passes, and if you don't run those, then he's not really playing. I love their defense, but it's also got some really old dudes that, old dudes tend to not stay healthy. So I'm with you. That was one I knew some people would say not for me at all. Another one,
Arizona.
Maybe Arizona wasn't on my list of like I think a lot of people would have them better, but maybe I would go with where was the other team I was going to go with? The Dallas Cowboys. So like you've got Dak coming back. Dak's obviously a great quarterback, but he's pretty old. Let's be honest, Joe Milton's on this team. That's why I like it. But no, they trade for George Pickens, and while he's a total malcontent, he and CeeDee Lamb will be a pretty good pairing. I think their offensive line is trash. They did draft Tyler Booker, so we'll see how he turns out. Um, I think their defense is not good outside of Micah Parsons. So, I mean, Deron Bland has some moments for sure. I think they've got a couple names, but I would not trade the Seahawks roster for the Dallas Cowboys roster, even with Dak.
No, no. The Cowboys are kind of like an NBA team that has some flashy big name players, but like there's almost no substance to them. And they're talked about on ESPN every 5 minutes. And when Dan Quinn was there, it was really the team that like got the most out of their parts. Like he did a really good coaching job with them, and they kind of got exposed a lot in the playoffs because they had limitations. And once you took Dan Quinn out of there, and some of their offensive line stuff started to retire, and like the running back room is horrendous. Like they were just riddled with mediocrity and disaster. And no, I do not like their roster at all. A couple of years ago, they were one of the best drafting teams for a while, and there's when they had like the really good offensive line and the really good running backs. And now it's a lot of big name, a lot of money at the top, and no, I do not like how they're built at all.
Yeah, I mean, I thought briefly about the Colts, but I just can't even come close to getting there.
I hate their quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel Jones is the top of the depth chart there right now. It's wild.
Their defense is just so mid.
Yeah, I just feel like their whole team is so bland. I don't
That's
know.
it. That's exactly it. They're the blandest franchise in the league right now.
I like their offensive line a lot, and I like their defensive line quite a
Yeah,
bit.
they're offensive, but they lost center and right guard. No, they have some young guys.
Yeah, and I also thought briefly about the Jacksonville Jags. Curious if you like. I'm not a big Trevor Lawrence guy. I think Geno is better than Trevor Lawrence, just as a measuring stick.
We don't have Geno anymore.
I know. I'm just giving that as a measuring stick of like, I don't think he's that great. I think he's okay. But I look at the rest of that. Travis Hunter is a lot of fun. That would be an interesting one to have around. And Brian Thomas is obviously amazing.
Their O-line stinks though.
Offensive line's a real, yeah, and their defense is not that great.
Their secondary is awful.
Yeah.
I think Jacksonville's another one of those fun teams. Like they're with Atlanta for me. Like they're gonna be very fun to watch. But like winning a Super Bowl or like a sustainable roster, like no, God no.
All right. Did you think about the Las Vegas Raiders at all?
No.
I
think they're going to be a well-coached team. But when I looked at their depth chart, like they are not good. They're very early. They're not the 2010 Seahawks because they have Crosby and Bowers. Like Crosby and Bowers are better than like all pro level players already. But I look elsewhere beyond that. Like who's their 7th or 8th best player? Like their secondary their back 7 on defense looks rough. The receiver room is rough. Genty's obviously going to be really cool. I forgot about him. He's clearly, but he might be their 3rd best player already. Like,
and Dante Thornton Jr. is tearing it up.
He's tearing it up. Hasn't been on the field yet.
I know. But it's going to be a fun team. Like that will be the teams I will look to watch in the morning games before the Seahawks play. The Falcons will be probably tops. Obviously, I'll always be looking at NFC West teams, but the Raiders will be probably right after the Falcons for me, or maybe neck and neck. Like those are the two teams I'll be looking to see pretty constantly because I'm really curious. Brock Bowers, Dante Thornton's a burner. Jacoby Myers is fine. He's not great. He's fine. I like Jack Besh. I don't know if he's going to get any snaps, but I like him. Their offensive line's good. Ashton Genty is like super fun to watch. And then defensively, Crosby and Christian Wilkins.
Who's next?
Jermaine Pratt's not a bad inside backer they got from the Bengals. And I am curious about Darian Porter at corner. He's such a Pete prospect. I thought he was really rough in what I watched of him, but he's got remarkable athletic gifts and fits the Pete mold at cornerback. But yeah, they're kind of like Atlanta. Like if they work out, they're going to be scoring a lot of points, but probably giving up a fair amount of points too.
Yeah, and then when you add the coaching element with Chip Kelly, it's going to be a very fun team to watch. Defensively, like I'm very curious how they look defensively because we saw what Pete Carroll's defenses were like when they didn't have a lot of talent. I'm curious how that looks with like one elite edge rusher, and then just can he put that group together like he did at the beginning, or is it going to look like the 2022 and 3 Seahawks? I'm very curious to see what that looks like defensively.
So how do you feel with where we ended up with the Seahawks around 12 to 13 overall, roster-wise?
Yeah, that's felt right to me. That's
Yeah.
where I've not understood kind of where I see them in the 20s a lot or 21. I felt they're in the 12 to 15 range because of the uncertainty on offense. And I think it was Ryan Clark who said, I have no idea what Darnold will be this year.
Yeah,
And I think
that's
that's
where I'm
fair.
at.
I think that's fair. I have no idea. He could be. I think the thing I liked about him in terms of like, he's not going to convince you if he's bad. Like Geno, I think the issue I had with Geno is if he plays okay, you're still at a level that's high enough. His floor is so high, you're still going to be pretty good. At least if Darnold stinks, you at least know the truth. And so I don't think it's a good thing as a fan, but I think as a roster builder, at least you know, like we're not going to get diluted into this guy. And so I think the defense is obviously the best part of what the Seahawks have going. And I'm just curious to see if there's questions with the offensive line and the quarterback. But I think that's where I feel about them right now. And I think they have a high ceiling if the offense hits. But yeah, I think that's where I think the Rams would be like 10 and the Seahawks would be 13. That's kind of where I see it in my mind.
If you could only have one,
Yeah.
the Seahawks offensive line is a top 12 unit by whatever measure this year, okay? Or Sam Darnold is a top 12 quarterback, and you can only have one.
Ooh.
What do you think would make the biggest difference in terms of your rankings that you did, where you'd switch your roster rankings around if one of those two things was true?
I think I'm going to go offensive line because of the impact on everything.
Mm-hmm.
Because then what you could do with the running game, and the running game has been so bad for this team for like 7 years, it feels, really since like Chris Carson. I think that just allows you to play such a different way where if you need to transition to a different quarterback, you don't want to be a team like Seattle's been with Geno, where Geno's had to almost be like a superhero for them to function. You want them to have an infrastructure. And for me, this year was always about putting in an infrastructure for the future quarterback. If Darnold's great, then good. You don't have to be chasing quarterbacks. If he's Matt Hasselbeck, then amazing. But I think the biggest thing is just completing this infrastructure because they have it on defense. On offense, they didn't have the play caller the last 5 years. They haven't had the offensive line in 9 years. The running game, I think that's where I'm looking for. Obviously, the defense getting good, but I think the infrastructure of an offense that you can just put in the quarterback, or you can develop a quarterback, or who knows what Jalen Milroe is. I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
But I think offensive line being top 12, I think that would excite me almost more than any other development on the team this year.
Yeah, it feels like all of a sudden your floor just completely goes up and you got literally a foundation to build the whole rest of the team around. And it's a young offensive line to boot. So all those things together, I think I go in the same direction. And I think if they did have a top 12 offensive line, I think they would jump Minnesota in my rankings. I think they would jump the Chargers. They would probably jump the Bucs for me. Yeah. And they'd be in a conversation with the Rams as well. So like those are some of the teams that they would jump for me. But yeah, it was a fun little exercise, Jeff. So I always appreciate you putting up with my weird questions.
No. Every year at this time, we're saying, let's just hope they're okay on offensive line. This year, let's hope for something better. They finally addressed an offensive line in the first round. They have a system and infrastructure that's built offensive lines for years. Let's hope it's not just okay. Let's hope it's a little better.
I am unreasonably optimistic, and it's very unreasonable. And I'm hoping that optimism pays off. I cannot say I've felt that way in past years, so it is a little different, and it will be a steep fall if they do not deliver. I will be crestfallen for sure. All right, Jeff. Thank you. That was another edition of Hawk Blocker Mornings with Real Jeff Simmons. Make sure you follow him online. Make sure you give the show a like and click subscribe. Follow us at patreon.com/hawkblogger. If you want to come to a steak dinner with myself, Evan Hill, Dana O'Gorman, as well as a bunch of other patrons, there's still space at the Ring of Honor dinner that will be happening the Friday night before the season opener. You just go to patreon.com/hawkblogger, look for the Ring of Honor tier, and be one of the last 3 people to be able to join that spot. It also gets you access to the Discord channel and a special elite section in the Discord server just for our highest tier members, which I really, really appreciate. It's also just a great way to support the show and help us do all sorts of cool things. We're planning next year for the Combine. We're going to bring a whole host. Jeff's coming. I think Nathan will come again. We're going to get Evan and Josh Cashman. We're going to get a whole crew there. And anything you guys can do to support makes that a little bit more reasonable as my travel budget. I don't have ESPN or, KJR or any of the other places paying for my travel. It's all coming out of my pocket. So anything you guys can do to help support, I always appreciate it. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the show. I definitely did. Have a great rest of your Saturday. I'm Brian M. Hedger. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings.